So let's begin our presentation. I want to introduce our two speakers today who lead the orientation efforts here at Brown. We have Brenda Ice, who's the Senior Associate Dean and Senior Director of Residential Life. I think many of you will recognize her from other webinars we have done. And Amari Boyd, who's the Assistant Dean of the College for First Year and Sophomore Studies. Welcome to you both. And I begin, Brenda, you're going to start the presentation. Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you, Mikkel, for having us in your last series of the summer. I really appreciate it. We have developed a presentation, a few slides for you that gives a general overview of our orientation experience and answers many of the questions that you posed for those of you that registered and provided those questions in advance. And certainly we'll create time at the end if you have additional questions that pop up. Please use the Q&A feature listed at the bottom of the screen. But we will go ahead and get started. Give me a second to share the presentation. Just for eye contact, my camera is here, but my presentation is here. So just listen to the sound of my voice as we kind of move through today's conversation. So welcome, and we thank you so very much for the opportunity to be able to talk a bit about the orientation experience, both from a lens of a new student, whether that's a first-time first year or a transfer student, and then even be able to capture about what that experience might mean for you as a parent or family member supporting your student through their journey here at Brown. A bit of what we plan to get through. It may seem like a lot on the screen, but I promise you we will be as succinct as we can to kind of get through this particular process. But we think it's important to provide some framing and context about who we are as the Orientation Welcome Committee. We'll talk a bit about what we do, what's at our core, and then be able to identify those three items and talk a little bit more about what that would mean for the student experience. Most, if not all, of this program would not be possible without our peer mentoring programs to support our orientation efforts. So we want to be able to talk through a few of those mentors. This is not an exhaustive list, but these three entities show up most often in the orientation program, and so want to highlight them. We will talk about the schedule. Many of you have asked, can we see the full schedule? Not quite yet, but we will be able to do some quick highlights about the program, how we design them, and maybe even give you a teaser into some of the programs and opportunities that the students will experience when they arrive at the end of the month. And then what we've done is try to capture many of the questions and put them into particular categories. And so we will talk a little about those at the end, and then certainly reserve time for additional questions that come up as we move through our process and conversation. So I'll begin by talking a little bit about the Orientation Welcome Committee. It's the name that's signed at the end of all of our weekly communications, but many of you are like, but there's no name, so who is this committee? And so our Orientation Welcome Committee is actually our orientation principals group, and this is a collaborative effort between that of the college and of campus life. And so between our two kind of units and divisions within the university, we come together and basically we decide and become the decision makers around the overall planning and administering of the onboarding and new student experience for our students from an undergraduate perspective. So that is a first-time first year and a transfer student. It doesn't mean that we don't collaborate with graduate students and graduate studies. We do have a joint resource fair where we showcase all resources that are available to all students, but primarily our focus is with the undergraduate student experience. To that end, our group is comprised of 2 representatives from the college and 2 representatives from campus life, and then a representative from the University of the Office of University Communications. Amari and I serve as co-chairs of this principals working group and bring folks together to talk about the overall schedule and ultimately how we set and design that. We are responsible for the communication, so those weekly notices that go out, how they go out, how they're formatted, and the content of which we provide. And then we also work on the assessment, so the actual review of our program input and feedback that we receive from students, from families, from participants, leading some of our sessions so that we can continue to grow the program and make continuous improvements. Amari.
Yes, so we have a couple of core principles within our new student orientation that essentially serves as a framework for our orientation schedule, and especially as we prepare for your students' journey at Brown. And those core principles include academic preparedness, campus resources, and community connections. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about the academic preparedness piece. And essentially it's, we want our incoming students to learn about the open curriculum and explore academic programs and courses available at Brown. More specifically, we want students to know what this might look like for them as a Brown student through the exploration of those academic programs and courses. And so our open curriculum essentially encourages students to have the freedom to create their own educational journey. But it also expects students to remain open to people, ideas, and experiences that might be entirely new to them. Some things that we want our students to know about the open curriculum, or like the core components of the open curriculum, is that there is no distribution or core requirements mandating coursework in particular fields of study. There's a more simplified grading system without a grade point average and class rankings, and those grade options can look like satisfactory, or grade options with a no credit or a letter grade. And then we also invite students to concentrate rather than major in different fields of study. And the purpose of that is to really lean into the liberal arts approach and encourage students to explore different disciplines during their first 2 years, and then really concentrate and go into more depth in the latter 2 years of their time at Brown. There are more specific degree requirements that we do have that I will not get into, because that is a conversation that we at the college are constantly having with students at pretty much every point of their academic journey, just to remind them what they need to make sure they get that Brown degree. We also detail some of these key components of the open curriculum in our weekly communications to our students, which are also seen on our orientation website. And we also have students complete a Canvas course module that reviews some of these facets as well. And the new module should be open by this Friday, and that's where we're going to start encouraging students to think about what their schedule could look like, reminding them that you might have to dedicate 5 to maybe 15 hours per week per class, depending on your course load. So we're starting to have all of those preliminary conversations before they meet with their academic advisor and their Meiklejohn advisor during advising day, during orientation. Next slide.
Okay. So campus resources, under this particular core principle, the idea and concept or the learning outcome that we hope our students will achieve in this is to know how to navigate our campus, and more importantly, have the confidence to know where and how to access these levels of support services. We recognize that this is a new experience coming in, whether you're a first-year student, or even a transfer student. While you might have navigated differently and known your resources from your high schools or previous institutions, Brown is different, as is any institution, and so you have to kind of work to feel your way around that. We're not expecting everyone to be a full expert of resources and availability. I will just go on record. I've been here 2 years and there's still something new I learn every day, and that's okay. And I think that's what we're trying to shape as we move through this orientation program. What are the key resources you need to know today? What do you need to know in the first week, the first month? And we pace it out such that you get the information you need in the time that makes the most sense, and not necessarily force you to capture everything on day one and feel like you have to be the expert by the first day of class. That is not the design of our orientation program. When we think about the number of campus resources, they really fall into two basic categories. There's the curricular resources that are available, and then the co-curricular experiences. And I'm just going to rattle off a few, and this is not by any means an exhaustive list. You will have opportunities to speak directly with individuals and representatives of these departments, either during orientation or during the course of your first year here. So no need to jot them all down. We will make sure that you have access to this information as we move throughout our program. But when we think about academic or curricular opportunities, think about tutoring or the writing center, the library, and the services provided there to kind of support the academic rigor for students. Many don't consider this as a resource, but faculty open office hours is a campus resource that we want to encourage students to, one, know about, and then actually utilize as they think about how they would shape and support their journey in the classroom. Career services is another opportunity that most times campuses think about when you're a junior or senior. We want to introduce that to students in their first year. They have useful resources and tools, not necessarily about career trajectory, but think about internships or research opportunities or ways that they can parlay their first year experience into the second and third year. We want to introduce them to those opportunities well in advance. We will showcase a few peer mentoring programs, particularly for orientation, but there are departmental undergraduate mentoring programs, and I believe the acronym are DUGs. So imagine that each discipline or concentration now has a group of mentors and student peer leaders that are there to kind of guide you through very specific environmental sciences related mentoring that is different from the John who does general support for you. Those are just a handful, again, not exhaustive, of some curricular opportunities. When we think about co-curricular, I want to kind of parse out, because we'll talk more about them in the next slide, but these become then those support structures, the other things you may not know you need until you need them. And so it's important for us to kind of just give you a greater exposure to some of those. We have an office dedicated to student support services, which is basically case management. And so you'll have an academic advisor, and they're going to kind of guide you through the support you need to think about classes and how you show up inside the classroom. Consider the student support services or the deans that support case management as the counter to that. So they're the everything else support structure. So yes, you might be doing well academically, but you might still be finding struggling with making connections or looking for opportunities to talk through some things that might be happening at home. Student support services can kind of serve in that non-clinical support structure, and they too then serve as a resource to then redirect or connect you to other services that exist in our health and wellness units. So that's our student health services, our CAPS, which is our counseling services, or even our own ambulatory services that we have in EMS. Any one of those could be an additional resource or support out of that co-curricular experience. DPS is our Department of Public Safety, another resource available to students. I'm not necessarily trying to identify just moments of crisis point, because they are an excellent resource when things are going absolutely well and you want to be able to touch point and reconnect and engage with these individuals. If you know them before the crisis occurs, it makes it a whole lot easier to then navigate and move through those particular resources and services. Our student accessibility services is another key partner that kind of overlaps in both the co-curricular and curricular experience. And so if you aren't thinking that you need support from a housing or dietary, but may have some requests for extended test taking or the ability to have a transcription of notes from teachers or from your professors, SAS can support both that classroom experience as well as that out of classroom experience. And we'll make sure that our website is redirected to those links for our students, and then those become part of the conversations they're going to have with their peer leaders during their time with us. Community connections is our third core pillar and foundational grounding. And so this is really where I think many students and many of the questions that we were seeing come in is, how are they going to find their people? How are they going to find their place? How do they feel like they are part of the Brown community beyond just the person seeking the degree? And this is where we work really hard, and we're very intentional that the connections we are building into the orientation experience are meant to be small. They're meant to be this kind of cohort living, so that you don't get to know all 1,700 of the class on day one, because if you do, I want to know who you are and you need to come work for me. But the idea is that you have small little groups. Let's get to know yourself and a small cohort in that particular one. We'll connect you based off shared interests, but more importantly, we think it's important, particularly in our orientation structure, to make sure that you're also being exposed and create a greater understanding of our diversity that exists. And that's both diversity of the individual and identities, but more importantly, diversity of thought. And so if we can think about capturing that open curriculum and turning that into a complementary of our connections, it makes your experience that much more meaningful and worthwhile. When we think about some of our partners that support this, I serve as the senior director of our residential life. So this is my shameless plug that our team in our peer leader and professional staff serve as that connection point. We get you connected to the people you live with and engage with both on the floor, in the building, and around the neighborhood or community. We have several identity centers. And so if you identify with a particular center or community, or serve as allyship in that particular community, that is another way to kind of create your people, your place. And the one thing I will say is that we hope that you are centering yourself in more than one location. It's so that you may have a core group for orientation, but then you gravitate to another group of folks that are really that support structure and connection for the academics. And then there's another for social. We want you to diversify your connections. It's great if you have one singular, that's fine. We're not saying that's a bad thing, but throughout our orientation experience, the idea is to expose you to the number of ways in which you can connect with student organizations, activities, student government, and maybe even after the end of this year, serving as one of our peer mentor roles that we're about to talk about next.
Thank you, Brenda. Yeah, so as Brenda just alluded to, yes, peer mentoring is huge, especially when it comes to orientation. And so there are a lot of students at Brown that love to find ways to give back to the community, and that has given them so much, and serving as a peer mentor is one way to kind of pay that forward. So there are a myriad of peer mentoring programs at Brown, like really at almost all of the campus resources that Brenda mentioned before. But like Brenda said, for the purposes of today's presentation, we're going to focus on the ones that students first interact with during new student orientation. So next slide, please. Yes, the Meiklejohns. So the Meiklejohns are peer advisors who are sophomores, juniors, and seniors that are trained to provide first-year students with advice and counsel on the academic, extracurricular, and social transitions that come with attending college for the first time. Meiklejohns support students understanding from a student's point of view, and what it means to actually have the freedom to choose any and all of your courses. And they'll also guide them through the logistics, such as course registration, which happens through our platform called CAB. CAB stands for Courses at Brown. You can log on I believe it's cab.brown.edu, perhaps. And you can look at all of the courses that are being offered in the fall semester. And there are also some courses that are already listed for winter sessions, and even some for the spring for 2024. Yes. Meiklejohns will also help students think about study habits, going back to like that transition into college. They're there as a resource. So students will meet with their Johns and their advisors on advising day, like I mentioned earlier. However, that's not necessarily the last time students will interact with their John. Usually Johns share their phone number, maybe even socials or emails, and will periodically check in with their advisees to see how they're doing, especially after shopping period, which is the first 2 weeks of classes. At other institutions, this is sort of known as add drop, but it's a way for students to kind of test out their courses, see if it's a good fit for them, and then they would make their solidify their final course schedule by the end of shopping period. So the Johns are really, really important, not just in helping students register for courses, but also helping them think through and finalize those courses as well. And Johns, can also serve as a point of connection in thinking about internships and research as well. The Johns have lots of different spheres of influence. And, if your student's John is concentrating in a completely different discipline, a lot of times what might happen is that they might connect their advisee with another John that they know whose academic interests and research interests align with that advisee. So it really is a great opportunity for students to learn that almost like hidden pieces of curriculum that come with Brown, like through a student's perspective. And so they are so important when it comes to the advising process. Yes. Oh, the other thing about Johns is that they are very, very, very important. And your student will also have an academic advisor, which is typically a faculty or staff member at Brown. The academic advisor does hold the power in terms, not power, but they're able to give your student like an alt pin code, which is what they need to register. So your student won't be able to get that information from their John, but it really is a collaborative process or a collaborative effort between faculty and staff and students when supporting incoming first year students. Next slide.
Right. So the next one and the next two actually are embedded in the campus life unit, and particularly in our residential life or our new student programs and community initiatives unit in Res Life. The first is our first year fellows, and this is a year-long position, and it is primarily juniors and seniors. Occasionally we've hired a sophomore, but these are folks that have probably been an orientation leader for a few years with us and now want to serve in more of a kind of advisory role. So they take on a different leadership opportunity by sticking around in our department for a full year beyond the orientation experience. They serve as the advisor of the Bruno leaders, who are orientation guides that I'll talk about momentarily. But there they are providing them with the skills and training that they need to facilitate the orientation sessions as we move through the schedule. They are there as an additional resource to our department in residential life. When we think about the pulse of the first year or transfer student, these are the folks we tap back into to say, what's happening, what type of program might we be offering or could we offer to ensure that we are engaging with them beyond the first 4 or 5 weeks of the semester. From a planning perspective, they, along with our director and assistant director, actually build the training schedule for the Bruno leaders and then facilitate it. And so they're with us getting training, and then they become the trainers of the students that they would lead that will then support our orientation experience. Beyond that, they also support our weeks of welcome. So orientation doesn't just end on September 5th. While on paper that will say the end of our orientation experience. As we've said time and time again, this is meant to be a year-long journey. And so the weeks of welcome are opportunities for other campus partners to share their resources and information with first years that they weren't actually able to get included in those 5 or 6 days of the orientation experience. The additional planning also comes that throughout the year, they're reconnecting with residential life and other campus partners to say, are there other programs we might be able to offer? Is there something happening at this point in the academic year that would facilitate a larger conversation and we bring in more first year students into that particular conversation? That's their planning effort. And then they are the support structure for the Bruno leaders. As the leaders are going through conversations with students, if they are paused or perplexed in any way by information that's been shared, the first year fellows become that point of contact for Bruno leaders to say, can you help me out? What do I do? And how do I get the student connected to the resources available to them? The Bruno leader is our orientation leader. And I probably should have reversed this and put fun at the first portion of this, because these are some highly motivated, energized upper class students, primarily sophomores. And that's important key because many of them had such a wonderful orientation experience in their first year that this is their momentum and energy that they want to put forward and say, I want to give back. So I'm going to do it in a bit of reverse order. The fun, the energy, it is their commitment to say, I want to make the experience for this new incoming student as great as it was for me. Rarely you get those that are like, well, mine didn't go so well, so I want to make sure I can do something different. I'm not mad at those that also go through that, but primarily many of them had a wonderful experience and want to be able to create that level of excitement and energy. I think it's key here to indicate that we don't have an ideal Bruno leader because we don't have an ideal Brown student. And so the idea is that personalities, identities show up in very different ways. And so for as much as we have the high energy extrovert, we also have the kind of reduced energy, not to say that's a bad thing, but know that the introvert and the activities that we provide can still allow those that aren't really all in all the time can still feel like they have a sense of place. And that's what the Bruno leaders provide. By way of connections, this is going to be one of the first entry points for our students to get to know someone other than their roommate. And so in our design of Bruno groups and the cohort they come together, we work really hard not to match based off of where a student lives. It really is to create a larger exposure of a group of about 20 students that you will kind of spend your orientation experience with. You'll get to know them. You'll get to know a little bit more about yourself based off those connection points. And then those Bruno leaders are then clustered a bit based off of their first year fellow. And so then your small little cohort becomes a semi-large and even larger cohort so that you at least, our goal is that by the end of your orientation experience, you know, hopefully everyone in your cohort, but maybe 2 or 3 in your small cohort that you really have a connection point with, and then at least one additional one outside of your cohort. It's a small goal. If you get more than that, great. But the idea is that we want to get you those connection points so you can start making those on your own. And then they're your support structure. When I say your, I'm thinking about the students who might be joining today's conversation. They're the person we want you to lean into. When you are having questions, and it could be as simple as where is the Ratty, which is our dining facility, all the way to, I don't know that this is my place. How do I find it? Who do I connect with? They're your support structure. They're your resource. And more importantly, when they don't know the answer, they know how to say that and redirect you to the next available avenue. All right. This is the part where I think we saw lots of questions. What's the schedule? What are they going to do? How are they filling their day? Are there breaks available? Are they in, up at 8 and out at 9? All of those are not going to be answered here. So know that what we are providing here is just a general overview of our program. We have finalized the schedule, but we are intentionally waiting until 1 week before orientation to release that. That we want the momentum to build, and certainly there's energy around wanting to get to Brown, but we don't know that it's necessary to launch everything out for you to kind of maybe sit and wonder, what does this mean and what does this look like? So this week in our weekly communication, we'll actually be sharing a kind of schedule at a glance. So that you can get an idea of what each day might look like. But 1 week prior to orientation, so August 23rd or 24th, you will then get a release, an email that says, here's the full schedule, and then the full schedule will be available on our website. You, my friends, those of you joining us today, get an opportunity to get the at a glance before it's actually provided this week. And so orientation officially begins on August 31st. And on that day, you can look forward to meeting with your Bruno leaders for the first time and kind of building that community and connection. And then we're going to have a campus resource fair. So all of those resources that we just talked about in the previous slide will be camped out on our main green, set up with tables, giving away tchotchkes and swag, but more importantly, presenting themselves to the students to say, here I am, here's what we offer, and here's how you would interact with our office throughout the year. There'll be other things each day, but those are some highlights that will happen on the very first day of orientation. On Friday, September 1st, we are calling that kind of the academic day. That is your advising, that's your registration. And so you will spend then that day being introduced to your Meiklejohn. And so you'll spend the day with them learning about the open curriculum and selecting courses and having backup plans to the plans in case those courses don't necessarily line up with your schedule or what you're trying to do. And you'll just spend the day in kind of academic preparedness. Saturday, September 2nd, we're having a festival. We like to build fun into the orientation. So we're having a first year festival, an opportunity to come together, socialize, and connect with folks beyond your cohort. We'll also spend some time that day thinking about your overall health and well-being. And so those might be moments where we think about our culture of consent and the ways in which we will navigate our campus and think about who you are, how you show up, and how the campus can support you through those decisions. On Sunday, September 3rd, it's our neighborhood rally. So we've got back-to-back festivals and opportunities. The first year festival is really everyone come together and you're there as a kind of class or cohort of first year and transfer. On Sunday, it's the neighborhood. So now we're concentrating you in the communities where you reside. And we're actually going to have kind of like an Olympics, activities and games available for you to compete against one another in a friendly sort of way. And you get bragging rights and maybe even some programming funding sent your way such that you can continue that kind of neighborhood connection piece. On Monday, September 4th is Discover Providence. Brown is going to be here with you, but we want to make sure that you know the surrounding area. And so we're going to host some walking tours, some bus tours, and maybe even some boat tours around the area for students to get to know more than just the Brown campus. And then Tuesday is another academic focus day. This is the day of our academic expo. So Campus Resource Fair is meant to be kind of the resources. The academic expo are the academic resources, the departments, the disciplines, the opportunities for research and engagement. They will have an opportunity for students to kind of move and ask questions around what they would like their academic journey to look like. And we'll conclude with convocation. We'll end. We won't say it's time for bed, but at that point, that is the end of our orientation program, and then classes would begin on September 6th. We're now at the portion where we're trying to answer a bit of the questions that you framed in the registration process for us. And we've clustered them into 4 general areas. I will take on the first 2. Amari will hop in for the advising questions that came up. And then Mikkel will round us out with those that were specific to parent and families. So many of you are like, well, what do I do now? Do they come? What do I do? How do I figure these things out? One of the first things I'm going to share is to, from a Res Life perspective, make sure that you've connected with the roommate or roommates that you've assigned, that you've been assigned, that you've had some level of conversation with them so that you at least now have 1 or 2 people that you know, at least on the surface before you would actually arrive. We're also going to ask you to revisit all of those emails that we've been sending each week. You can go back through your email inbox, or more importantly, you can visit our orientation website. And there, just look on the summer email communication and you can see the full list of the communications that were provided each week as a kind of reminder of the things that you should be thinking about before you arrive. There's also a checklist on that website. So if you haven't already done so, please do the following: upload your photo for your ID, complete the modules assigned under the first year at Brown program, and then complete the Vector Solutions modules, which include that around alcohol awareness, sexual assault prevention, so that you are that much more prepared when you arrive with us in a few weeks. There were lots of questions about what if we're coming early? What's that going to look like? What's the day look like? For any of you that signed up for any of our pre-orientation programs, you have already received communications from those program leaders. They're providing you with the details of when to arrive, how to arrive, and what you can expect for those respective programs. But we have them scheduled for any that are actual residential component and coming to campus the week of August 21st. And so those days vary whether you're in Mosaic, TWTP, or IMP. Athletes or student athletes have a much earlier arrival point, and those vary, including those that might actually arrive this week. But those communications have already been shared by those particular sponsors. If you don't have any of that communication, you can certainly reach out to us at the end of this presentation, and we can make sure you get those connection points and information. Generally speaking, everyone else arrives on August 30th, which is our official move-in day, but not necessarily the start of orientation. And rather than go through what you can expect, I'm going to ask you to revisit Mikkel's family and parent website, because myself and my director of residential operations hosted a webinar on living on campus where we outline what your arrival experience will look like. Revisit that video and then reach out if you have additional questions. Amari, would you like to take some of the advising questions that came up? I think you touched on many of them as you were doing the overview of academic preparedness, but perhaps you can talk more about that registration period and the role of the advisor.
Yeah, definitely. So we did get a question about what is shopping period. And I also just want to give a little bit more context. Students at Brown they pre-register for classes. And for students who are in semesters 3 and 5 and 7, they did their pre-registration in the previous semester in the spring. Your incoming first-year student will basically do their pre-registration during advising day. And that comes before shopping period, which is essentially a free-for-all for all the students. Shopping period starts, I have to look at the academic calendar. I believe shopping period starts on the 6th. And it ends 2 weeks after that. And when a student is participating in shopping period, they get to explore courses to see if they align with their interests. And they can also have access to the Canvas course materials of the courses that they're shopping, even if they're not pre-registered for that course. At the end of the shopping period, if students are not officially registered for that course, then they'll be removed from that Canvas course site. So that's also a nice opportunity during shopping period for students to really look at the course materials, look at the syllabi, look at those final assignments, and see if that makes sense for their schedule for their first semester at Brown. Other questions include, what does a typical day look like for a first year? How many classes do they usually have on a day, or maybe even a semester? So I think one thing that I find myself explaining a lot is that at Brown, we count courses a little differently. So one course credit at Brown is equivalent to what might be 4 course credits at other institutions. And so the academic requirements are designed so that students should typically take about 4 classes each semester. The maximum amount of courses that a student can take in a semester is 5, and that is a hard policy. Students are not allowed to take more than 5 courses at Brown. Students can take a minimum of 3 courses, but no more than 2 times during their academic journey at Brown, because we want to make sure that they graduate with at least 30 course credits. So yes, so typically students will take 4 courses each semester. depending on how they're doing or what they're feeling, they might take 3 courses one semester, but we just want to make sure that they reach that 30 credit course minimum by the end of semester 8. And students, what that looks like in a day really does depend on the class, the department. So, you know, I don't often see schedules that have more than like 3 or 4 classes in a day. But depending on what you're enrolled in, like perhaps you're enrolling in a computer science course or an engineering course or something that requires like a lab, you know, you might have, it would be a little tough if you had like your actual course and your lab in the same day. That might be a pretty long day for a student. So there's a lot of flexibility, and that's also where we like to lean on the expertise of our Mickle-Johns to get a sense of, you know, what seems feasible. The other question I got was about the advisors. So to really lean into like the liberal arts experience, you know, for those first 2 years to be really exploratory. Your first year students, academic advisor is essentially an exploratory advisor. They're there as a resource to maybe help students think through potential pathways to concentrate in a particular department. However, by the end of a student's 4th semester at Brown, they're required to submit a concentration declaration. So, which is also known as like declaring your major. That's how other schools might frame that. That is a pretty rigid deadline. Once a student submits their concentration declaration, then they are assigned to an academic advisor in their department. So even though the first 2 years, a student's advisors might not be directly connected to their academic interests, by the time they submit that declaration, they'll be concentrating in that department and they'll be assigned to faculty in their preferred department. I also got a question about where can I get a list of the summer reading for freshmen. So at Brown, we do a first readings program. And for the last 4 years, the text that was assigned for the first readings program is the Slavery and Justice Report at Brown. And it's an opportunity for students to not only engage with primary texts, but to also challenge students to really think critically about place and purpose and the legacies of Brown and how they choose to disrupt that or just think critically about it. And so students have already received in our emails the link to read the Slavery and Justice Report on our Manifold website. They're encouraged to engage in a couple of discussion questions. And then during orientation, they're going to be separated into smaller discussion sessions, about no more than 15 students per session, which is led by a faculty or staff facilitator to think a little bit more deeply about the text. So that is how Brown does their summer reading, or what we call our first readings. Okay, and let me look at the live chat.
Sorry, I can answer a few on the parent side, and then if we have any more that come in while I'm talking, we'll go through a few more.
Thank you, Michelle.
We are headed towards the 1 o'clock hour, and we've had so much information. Thank you both. And I'll get back to you in just a second. So the few quick ones that I got on parents and families, who is the point of contact? I am your central point of contact, but you don't necessarily have to go through me every time. If you know your question is about residential life, please direct that to residential life. If you know if it's about advising, please send it to advisors. But if you just have no idea where to start, I am always a place that you can begin with. Or if it's something of a little bit larger issue, I'm here. I'm at family@brown.edu, and I'm in my emails all the time. So So please feel free to reach out to me. You can also, I'd love to meet folks on August 30th and 31st at the Parent Welcome. I received a lot of questions about the welcome and what the schedule is. The schedule is now live on the Parent Welcome webpage. So I'll put that in the chat in just a second, but you can go and check that out. And like Brenda went through the various opportunities for students, the event on the 30th is really a social event for you to meet some of us, also meet each other. The event on the 31st is more informational. Some of the information your students are going to be receiving, you'll get similar information geared just for parents. We will have 2 large panel sessions about staying healthy in every single way on the Brown campus and acclimating to their new environment. We will have tours, open houses. We will have some specific sessions for groups like varsity students and Brown RISD dual degree students. There will be a number of administrators on hand, from public safety to accessibility services. A lot of the folks that are going to be in the afternoon meeting with your students to talk about these same things will be around in the morning for meeting with parents and speaking to them. One of the questions that we received quite frequently was about, when do I say goodbye to my student? So I'm going to have Brenda answer that question in just a second, but before we do, one specific one was about convocation, and that does come up quite a bit. Academic convocation is on the Tuesday after Labor Day. That is our traditional convocation where students walk through the gates to begin their academic career at Brown. And the convocation is geared specifically to students. It's an outdoor event and it is live streamed, so parents and family members can watch it and see the pageantry of their first ceremony at Brown. If you are in the area, you are certainly welcome to attend, but the students are the primary focus of this event. Unlike commencement, where we invite every single person who is related and affiliated with a Brown student, the convocation really is meant for students to create that cohort that both Amari and Brenda had spoken about. So back to, when's that final point of goodbye? Brenda, I'm going to let you take that one.
Okay. And I'm actually going to move to our last slide so that folks can see this while we're chatting. So it's not a goodbye. It's just a see you for now. The idea is that, we want to create like a hard stop. And certainly that will, I think we saw some questions. So you'll have the day to move in and get settled. We will then transition the students to dinner so that they can start to kind of be in community with one another before they launch into the full orientation schedule the next day. If you're looking for a hard time or a hard date, I would say that beginning August 31st, you should anticipate that your student will be highly engaged and involved in all the activities that we have planned for orientation. If you're still questioning, well, can I stick around? Will be opportunities to still see them. I challenge you to think about what your student or your child would do in a moment of, I got a request to attend an event by my Bruno leader or faculty or staff member, and I'm also getting a call from my family. Who do I say no to? How about you not give them that decision making and just simply let them kind of move through those particular programs? All students are encouraged to attend all of our sessions. If there are moments that they can step out, we certainly recognize they can do that, but perhaps you minimize the amount of step outs that they would take to reconnect or engage with you. Their Bruno leader will identify throughout their time together where they absolutely need to be and when they need to be there. And if there's a window for them to also see you on your way out, then they will be able to coordinate that. But if you could help us, help them really connect and engage with us in all elements of the orientation experience, it will go a long way for those concerns and questions around how do they build community, how are they getting connected, and how are they feeling like they have a sense of place here at Brown. And then you can always come back for a parent and family weekend in October.
Absolutely. That's a good segue, Brenda. So we have about 3 minutes left. Before we leave everyone, I wanted to just tap into all of your knowledge before we go and ask you what tips you want to leave with parents and families as they spend these final weeks. And again, it's not a goodbye. This is just a transition. But Amari, what's your top tip for parents as they prepare?
Please read the emails. They have lots of resources. One of the first emails we sent out to incoming first year students was a document called Your Bruno Beginnings. And I really think it's a great, it provides an amazing overview of almost everything your student should expect as they, enter their first semester at Brown. So I would encourage folks to not only review the emails, but specifically look at Your Bruno Beginnings. It's really, really helpful.
Thank you. And I'm going to put that right in the chat. All right, Brenda.
Perfect. All right. So I always have useful tips. I've been doing this for a number of years. I think what I would say today that'll be different from what you'll see on the Living at Brown webinar, if you revisit it, is that this is your journey too. As much as this is their orientation experience, if this is your first child, your first student in college, your first student at Brown, might even be your fourth, but still treat it like an opportunity for you to be oriented or reoriented to the college experience. The same resources that are available to students, we serve at the pleasure of our students and also at you. So if you have questions, while we may not be able to speak specifically about the details of the individual, call us. We'll talk about the general process, what it means, and how they might be able to get the resource or information. So we're as much as part of their orientation journey as we are for you. Use us as a resource. We'll let you know when we don't have the answer and we'll get you connected to the others. But lean into us the way we're going to tell the students to lean into their Bruno leaders and other resources around campus.